This amendment would help families across the nation by making corporations pay their fair share and expanding the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. Additionally, I am offering an amendment to include the earned income tax credit look back, which would allow all taxpayers to use their earned income from previous years for calculating the EITC. People have told us they cannot afford living in the United States and putting more money in people's pockets in order for them to pay for gas and groceries and housing and healthcare. Madam Chair, I see that my time is coming to an end and I want to continue to be respectful of your committee, so I won't offer the other two. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak before this committee and advocate on behalf of my hometown. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
You may submit your statement for the record. Thank you very much. Mr. Thompson, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Very well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and all the members, Ranking Member McGovern, for being here all day, all night, all morning. And thanks to all of my colleagues who came to testify to ensure that our constituents would have an opportunity to have a little daylight shined on the debate regarding this terrible bill. A bill that adds to our national debt somewhere between $3.4 and $4.3 trillion, and that doesn't include the interest on that debt. Takes health care away from 13.7 million people, and it doesn't make them immune to being ill or injured, it just makes them uninsured. So this is going to add extra cost in the way of uncompensated care to our hospitals. 9 million people would lose food security, and all of this is to give a big tax cut to people who really don't need one in this environment. Madam Chair, I have a couple of amendments. My first amendment would strike the energy provision and restore the green energy tax credits. The American energy resurgence is at a crossroad, and my Republican colleagues seem eager to take the country down the wrong path. This reckless bill would gut America's clean energy production, raising the energy cost for millions of families and killing hundreds of thousands of good-paying manufacturing jobs. Repealing these clean energy credits would raise electric costs by more than $110 per year per household. That's to all of our constituents in red states and blue states. And despite what my Republican colleagues say, clean energy is the industry of the future. 93% of all new American energy supplied last year came from solar, wind, and battery storage. When we passed the clean energy credit, we deliberately paired supply and demand side incentives. By repealing some of these credits, you put at risk the entire supply chain at a time when the need for energy has never been greater. And just as energy demands dramatically increase with AI and crypto, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are looking to decrease our nation's ability to meet this demand. Repealing these credits also cause economic pain to all American families. Whether my colleagues believe it or not, clean energy is the industry of the future, especially in Republican states and districts. Over 400,000 new clean energy jobs have been created since 2022. More than half are located in Republican districts. And this also disadvantages us at a time when China is trying to dominate the global clean energy supply chain. Shutting off the most impactful tool we have to combat this is absolutely reckless. I would urge all of my colleagues to support this. My second amendment deals with would strike the provision that the Republicans stuck in this bill to eliminate the $200 tax on silencers. At a time when Republicans are taking health care away from 3.7 million Americans, food assistance away from 9 million Americans, and child tax credits away from 4.5 million children, it's outrageous that they would spend $1.4 billion to make silencers cheaper. I'm disgusted that the congressional Republicans are spending $1.4 billion to make it harder for victims of mass shooters to know where their shots are coming from when they're trying to run for cover. And it's appalling that their actions will make it more dangerous for law enforcement when they respond to these mass shooters. Madam Chair, silencers kill cops and make it easier for criminals to evade capture, but they do nothing to muffle the devastation that family members feel when they lose a loved one. As a combat veteran, a lifelong hunter and gun owner, I can tell you this provision has nothing at all to do with hearing protection, but it has everything to do with making money for a certain segment of the gun industry. If you're concerned about protecting hearing from gunfire, buy and use earplugs. I urge members to support these two amendments, and this one in particular to restore the tax on silencers and to promote public safety. And I'd like to submit for the record, Madam Chair, a list of data showing where silencers were used in mass shootings to kill cops, to kill kids, to make it more difficult for police to respond and to make our communities less safe.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Without objection.
Thank you.
It will be done. Ms. Simon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, ma'am. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. And what a day it's been, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, allowing me to speak on behalf of my constituents is one of the great honors of my life as a new member of the United States Congress, so thank you. And as you've heard from my Democratic colleagues today, the consequences, the deep, profound consequences of this bill and what the real life consequences will have on families in my district and across this great nation are devastating. My amendments are about 1, protecting access to reproductive health care, and 2, protecting our social safety net and our federal workforce. 1, my amendment focusing on repro health. We all know that Medicaid ensures that millions of Americans, millions of working poor and low-income Americans have access to essential reproductive health care, including postpartum. My amendment would prohibit cuts to reproductive health services, including counseling, birth control, prenatal care, pregnancy, and of course, again, postpartum care. It would do so by requiring that the actuary of CMS certify that the majority's bill would not decrease access to or coverage to any of those things. Mercy, mercy. Don't touch women's reproductive health care. But there's no question in any of our minds on both sides of the aisle that this bill would do exactly that, attacking women. When we talk about the majorities pushing through the largest cuts to Medicaid in United States history, here's what it really means. It means Medicaid now covering 40% of all births in this great nation, including prenatal, including pregnancy care and postpartum. It means that millions of people my God. Cutting Medicaid would mean rolling back progress. The Second Amendment that I presented and that was voted down shamefully by my Republican colleagues in the Oversight Committee, it was an amendment that would protect access to SNAP and support federal employee benefits. Simply put, this Second Amendment says that 1, if the Trump administration cuts SNAP, the budget by even $1, that the provisions in this bill that would cut federal employees' salaries, their pensions, labor protections would immediately expire. I know my time is about to expire, but I want to say one thing. Being a new member of Congress, what has hurt me the most is a woman who is a teen mom who took my daughter on the bus every single day to childcare, and I got support. I then, as a transit-dependent person, once a month took an hour-and-a-half bus to get $26 worth of food stamps, then would go to college, and then my day job, and then pick that baby up and come back again. That baby is an attorney. She passed the
I know some, but I don't know them all. I know most of these. So I'm going to call on you in the order in which I called your name to come up to the table. So, Ms. Castor, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Rules Committee and your professional staff for the opportunity to give voice to my neighbors back home across the Tampa Bay area. If you ask my neighbors right now what they care about, it's affordability. It's the affordability squeeze. Many of them are rebuilding their lives, their homes after the devastation of Hurricanes Helene and Milton. They're trying to figure out what the highest import taxes and tariffs in 100 years mean on their rebuilding efforts. And now they're confronted with this billionaire boondoggle that is going to impact the affordability of their health coverage, their electric bills. It's really harsh news to them to hear that the Republican budget bill is going to rip away coverage to 13.7 million Americans, and that it's going to increase electric bills. It's going to restrict nutritional assistance, food, healthy food for kids and older neighbors in order to provide a major tax cut to billionaires who simply do not need it. And then on top of all of that, this last discussion was very illuminating. Let's not forget, this will add about $3 trillion to the debt. So that's going to weigh down their purchasing ability. It's going to weigh down their lives. Everyone who has kids, you're looking at this huge weight around their necks going forward. And this bill is one that's going to hit Floridians particularly hard because we have the most neighbors who use the Affordable Care Act for affordable health care coverage. So when you rip away that little bit of help to pay for their co-payments and their premiums under this bill, that means that they could lose coverage or they're going to be paying a whole lot more. For the 3.9 million Floridians who rely on Medicaid, which is really a lot of children, it's the people we love the most, our parents and grandparents in long-term care. It's 40% of every birth in the state of Florida. They just look at this and they say, what a contrast to what Democrats focus on. We focus on making sure people have affordable health care coverage. That's what the Affordable Care Act was all about. Outlawing discrimination against pre-existing conditions, allowing young people to stay on their parents' plan to age 26, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, restraining the cost growth in health care. That's why it's been so difficult to listen, and we've done some myth busting here. It's been difficult to listen to, okay, no one's going to lose health coverage under the billionaire tax giveaway, but we know what the CBO has said. And that's why I'm offering a couple of amendments. One with Representative Gray that says none of the provisions of this bill will have the effect of increasing the number of uninsured individuals. And then another that's focused truly on Medicaid fraud. If you all haven't followed this story out of Florida on Medicaid fraud, I encourage you to do so. And we can do that by passing my amendment here. There was a settlement for overpayment, overbilling of drugs by Florida's largest Medicaid provider. They entered into a settlement agreement, but the governor took $10 million out of the $67 million settlement and funneled it to political action committees to oppose constitutional amendments on the ballot last year that were totally unrelated. It was actually on cannabis. So it took the Medicaid dollars, funneled it through nonprofits, and then to political campaigns. So this has been a bipartisan investigation in the Florida legislature. And while there's been so much discussion here that there's so much fraud and waste and abuse in Medicaid, it's time to really go after some of the fraudsters in Medicaid. And I think this can be a bipartisan effort to tackle it. But, you know, back to the affordability, and the fact is, what I'm hearing from folks, it's not just from neighbors, it's from all of our hardworking providers. Most doctors' groups are opposed to the billionaire tax giveaway, nurses' organizations, and I wanted to read just a few for the record that have come to my attention. This is a letter from leading health advocates. Okay, I'm going to offer this for the record and maybe hope that a few of my colleagues will ask about these when we get to Q&A. But this isn't right. Let's put the people's interests first over the special interests. Thank you. I yield back.
Without objection, they'll be put into the record. Mr. Levin.
Madam Chair, thank you. My colleagues have made many powerful arguments against this bill today, and I'm here for a very simple reason. That's to offer what I believe is a reasonable bipartisan amendment focused on a shared goal, protecting the American people from higher energy costs. This amendment would ensure that key provisions in this bill, particularly those that eliminate support for clean energy and roll back environmental protections, cannot take effect unless the Energy Information Administration confirms that they will not increase monthly household utility bills. That's it. If the policies in this bill are truly going to reduce costs, then this amendment simply adds a common sense verification step to confirm it, nothing more. But independent analysis already indicates this bill would raise energy costs for American families by at least 7%. That's an average of more than $110 per year per household at a time when nearly 80 million Americans are struggling to pay their utility bills. We shouldn't be adding to that burden. Now, some of my colleagues have asked, look, if clean energy is so affordable, why does it still need tax credits? It's a good question, and the answer is this. Clean energy is already the cheapest source of power in many markets, but the transition still requires upfront investment. We need to build transmission lines, upgrade the grid, and scale American manufacturing. The credits help unlock those investments and deliver long-term savings to consumers. At the same time, fossil fuels continue to benefit from long-standing subsidies and infrastructure that's been built and paid for over decades. Without tax credits, we're not creating a level playing field. We're favoring the status quo at the expense of innovation and competition. These investments are not only saving families money in the long run, they're creating jobs, and not just in any one part of the country. The clean energy economy is growing in red districts and blue districts alike. Solar plants, battery storage facilities, wind farms, electric vehicle factories, grid modernization projects. These are putting people to work in rural areas, in small towns, in manufacturing hubs, and communities that have seen jobs vanish in past decades. From Georgia to Michigan, North Carolina to California, clean energy is rebuilding America's industrial base and restoring pride and prosperity, including in places that have been overlooked for far too long. If we eliminate the tools that are making this growth possible, we don't just risk raising prices, we risk losing momentum on job creation, competitiveness, and true energy independence. This bill also contains provisions that raise fees on renewables will make it easier and cheaper for fossil fuel developers to access public lands. It weakens permitting protections, and it undercuts the economic foundation for one of the fastest growing sectors in our economy, all while shifting costs back to American families. Regardless of how you feel about clean energy or climate change, I hope we can agree on this. If we're going to pass legislation that affects energy markets, we have a responsibility to ensure it doesn't drive up costs for the people we represent. That's what this amendment does. It doesn't block the bill. It doesn't impose ideology. It simply says, let's get the facts first. Let's verify the real-world impact before we make irreversible changes. Our constituents expect us to be responsible stewards, not just of the environment, but of their hard-earned money. Let's show that we can work together to protect them from higher utility bills and preserve the job growth we're finally seeing across this country. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and to stand up for families, for fairness, and for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Ms. Sewell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam Chair, for the opportunity for me to give a voice to the great people of Alabama's 7th Congressional District on this debate. I have 2 amendments. My first amendment, amendment number 209, would extend the Affordable Care Act's premium tax credits to Americans in non-Medicaid expansion states like Alabama, who are caught in this coverage gap, as well as Americans who have lost Medicaid coverage as a result of the Republicans' cut in this bill. 1.5 million Americans are in the Medicaid coverage gap. These are the working poor. They work every day, many minimum wage jobs, and they make too much money to be on Medicaid, but they don't make enough money to be able to afford health insurance. They are truly the working poor. We must not let the ACA enhanced premium tax credits expire December 31st, 2025. And we must expand the premium tax credit for low-income citizens below 138% of the poverty line. I have heard from countless constituents who fall in this Medicaid coverage gap and are desperate to get health care. I spoke recently with one of my constituents, Kiana, who is caught in this gap. She lost her health care, her Medicaid coverage, following the end of the COVID public policy emergency exemption. When she tried to qualify for Medicaid again, she was told that she made more than the $295 a month that would make her qualify. This was no help to her, and you know what? The big billionaire boondoggle bill won't be of any help to her either. In my state, Medicaid is a bare bone minimum program. You have to be really, really poor. Back home in Alabama, we call it being po. You can't afford the O or the R in order to get Medicaid in my state. So instead of giving handouts to the billionaires, I would say let us use this opportunity to increase the number of Americans who have health care coverage. This amendment would jumpstart coverage for people who have been left out for far too long. These are parents, they are people with disabilities, individuals who work but can't afford and don't have jobs that have health care benefits. Simply put, as 10 states seem committed to denying benefits for Medicaid expansion, I want my residents in the state of Alabama who fall in this Medicaid gap to get coverage. So I'd ask you to consider that amendment. My second amendment is amendment number 139. It strikes the $5 billion worth of private school voucher schemes that are in this bill. Under the Republican plan, donors who contribute money or stock to these voucher plans will receive a tax credit of 100% contribution back in the form of a discount on their tax bill. It really is outrageous that we would actually help the wealthy and well-off pay for private schools for their own children. There's nothing in this bill that stops them from making their own children eligible to receive this private voucher. I know this issue way too well. My home state of Alabama has adopted a dollar-for-dollar tax shelter for donations to voucher schemes, and Alabama's public school children and teachers are paying the price. The private school voucher scheme is modeled after states like Alabama. Many Southern private schools were established during and after integration. Today, these same schools are benefiting from taxpayer dollars flowing rapidly, expanding voucher programs that are rampant with waste, fraud, and abuse. Instead of tackling the fraud in these programs, Republicans are hell-bent in overdrive, giving tax shelters in the form of a federal level. There's nothing in this bill that stops Alabama's wealthiest from being able to take a tax credit on the state level and now on the federal level. These academies do not have to live by the same standards as public schools. You know, in the state of Alabama, school choice doesn't really mean a choice. When you live in small rural communities that only have 2 schools, one that is public and all black, and one that is private and all white. That's in 2025. Not in 1965. We should not be promulgating these opportunities. Public schools don't have the same benefits. And I know that my colleagues will probably asked me about these private schools in the state of Alabama, and I look forward to that robust discussion. But I asked Madam Chair for unanimous consent to put into the record these articles about segregated academies across the South that are getting millions in taxpayer dollars.
Without objection, Ms.
Thank you so much, and I ask for support of both of these amendments.
Thank you. Ms. Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and members of the committee. I agree with many of the things that have been said so eloquently before me about the cuts to SNAP and Medicaid. And I have several amendments offered. They range from helicopter roundups of horses to saving the National Endowment for the Humanities. But I'm here now to advocate for an amendment that would strike a provision in the reconciliation bill that allows for the sale of at least 65,000 acres in Clark County, Nevada. Now, my amendment doesn't impact northern Nevada, nor does it impact Utah, where the representatives there agree with those sales. I'm talking about my district in Clark County, Nevada. About 2 weeks ago, during the 11th hour of the House Natural Resources Committee meeting, Representative Amadei introduced an amendment to sell off public lands in southern Nevada. Again, this is an area that he does not represent. He snuck this provision in during the middle of the night without consulting with me, any members of the Nevada delegation, or the Clark County Commission. If he had, he would have known there was not support for this, and this was not a responsible way to accommodate growth or manage our natural resources. So I'm here to defend the public lands in my district and stop them from just being auctioned off by the GOP and have the money used from the auction to pay down the tax breaks for the wealthy. Decisions to sell public land should not be made on a whim. They deserve careful consideration with input from the public and collaboration with the stakeholders who will be impacted by the sales. I know this because I've worked on this issue for decades as a member of Congress and as a state legislator. In fact, I had a bill that came to be known as Ring Around the Valley when I was in the state legislature that looked at growth boundaries. It encouraged high-density development, rewarded infill over sprawl, and required developers to contribute to the cost of infrastructure. Well, that didn't become law. It was kind of called Ring Around the Neck or Ring Around the Collar by some of the opponents. Had a picture of me with a noose on the cover of a magazine, but nonetheless, it started the conversation, and some of those things over time have been adopted. Representative Amadei's amendment was an irresponsible departure from that and will just roll back our attempts to kind of balance smart growth with conservation. His proposal includes no offsets for land conservation, and in fact, it appears that it overlaps a Viquame, a national monument that we just got created. Nor is it a silver bullet for addressing housing needs in Nevada. It does nothing to address the other factors that contribute to housing problems besides land costs. This includes supply chain issues, the Trump tariffs, a shrinking construction workforce, and lack of tax incentives to build affordable housing. What's more, it does nothing to address the infrastructure that will need to be built to accommodate far-flung developments caused by sprawl, and it ignores the drain on our very valuable resource of water because there are no built-in guide rails or guardrails. In fact, just this month, a report from the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service showed just how serious our lack of water is, both in Lake Powell and Lake Mead at 33% capacity, down 920,000 acre-feet, which equates to enough water to service 1.8 million homes. Furthermore, the U.S. Drought Monitor shows that areas in Clark County slated for land sales in this amendment to the reconciliation bill are in conditions that range from severe to exceptional drought, that being the most extreme. Nor does it take into account the new guidelines, the soon-to-be determined post-2026 operating guidelines for the Colorado River, and that has potential to shape our water allocation. If we're going to develop more land, we certainly need to take in that reality. Finally, nearly $1 billion in estimated revenue from the sale of this land in southern Nevada would go directly under this amendment to the U.S. Treasury, not come back to the state to be used for outdoor recreation, preserving critical ecosystems, or wildfire protection. So the public lands of Nevada will not be sold to benefit southern Nevada, nor will they be put up for sale by someone who represents southern Nevada. So for all these reasons, I would ask you to take this into consideration and let the people of southern Nevada have a say in what happens to their public treasures. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. Ms. Delbene, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member McGovern. I'm offering an amendment that is a proven solution to grow the middle class and significantly slash childhood poverty. Families across the country are struggling to make ends meet, and addressing the high cost of living is the #1 concern for Americans. My amendment would restore the largest ever middle-class tax cut by increasing the child tax credit and making it fully refundable. The current child tax credit leaves out 1 in 3 kids because they live in families that don't make enough money to access the full benefit. The Republican bill will leave out 17 million American children who are in families that don't earn enough to receive the full child tax credit. This Republican billionaire bailout bill would give the ultra-wealthy millions of dollars in tax breaks, while a 2-parent family working full-time, earning minimum wage, wouldn't qualify for the full child tax credit. Republicans claim to be pro-family, but they are knowingly leaving out the parents and children, the families that are struggling the most to make ends meet. I recently met a mom from Washington who has 4 adoptive kids. One of her children has a severe developmental disability and requires constant care. She worked multiple jobs so she could provide for her children. In 2021, she began receiving monthly child tax credit checks under the Democrats' American Rescue Plan. These payments allowed her to bring in extra help to care for her special needs child, so she could also spend more time with her other children and do things like taking them sledding in the winter. She told me that she finally felt like she had room to breathe with the extra money that helped support her family. That's what families really want, the stability and certainty that they can not only just get by, but also get ahead. Since the child tax credit payments ended in 2021, she's had to pick up more work to make ends meet again, meaning she spends less time with her kids. This budget bill shows where people really stand and shows where Republicans really stand, and it's not with hardworking Americans. If they did, they'd be giving tax cuts to the middle class, not the wealthy and the well-connected. They'd be expanding programs like the child tax credit so that parents who are working full-time but still struggling to make ends meet can get the full benefit. I urge my colleagues to support that amendment. I also have a second amendment that will reassert Congress's authority over trade, which is based on my legislation, the Prevent Tariff Abuse Act. President Trump has been waging a trade war around the world since he took office. This includes our close allies and economic partners like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. These tariffs are increasing costs for small businesses and raising the price of goods that families rely on every day, like groceries and household products. The president has callously said he could care less if prices go up because of his tariffs. Trump is openly telling Americans that they'll have to live with less and pay more under his economy, and for no reason. It's abundantly clear that there's not a plan or ultimate goal for what he wants to accomplish with these tariffs. He imposes tariffs one day, then removes or delays them the next, and this chaos is damaging to our economy and making America a difficult place to do business. If someone comes to the White House or Mar-a-Lago to bend the knee, maybe they'll get a special deal. And that reeks of corruption. The justification the president used to enact these tariffs was the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. For example, Trump imposed tariffs on Canada under the guise of a national emergency over fentanyl. But in reality, significantly, orders of magnitude more fentanyl goes into Canada from the United States than comes the other way around. Sweeping tariffs should not be put in place at the whim of a president. There should be a vote in Congress. We used to have bipartisan support that we needed to assert our congressional constitutional authority over trade. And we had that bipartisan support when President Biden was in office. But suddenly, Republicans are silent. If a Democrat was in the White House today, would you let them raise taxes on your constituents by thousands of dollars a year without a vote in Congress? I offer this amendment to give everyone the opportunity to make it clear that any president must come to Congress for a vote before he can put in place sweeping tariffs. We are a co-equal branch of government, and it's our job to stand up for our communities, not blindly follow the executive branch. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment as well, and thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Delbene. Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member. Madam Chair, this debate about Medicaid cuts is really a debate about life and death. The Medicaid program is not a Democratic program. It is not a Republican program. It is an important program for constituents in red districts and blue districts. And I have 488,000 people in my district that are Medicaid recipients. And I'm sure that many members across the aisle, perhaps including yourself, have many constituents that rely on the Medicaid program. So this is ultimately a debate about life and death. And I feel that this bill does not live up to the promises that the majority has made to the American people. For months and weeks, we've heard how Medicaid would not be touched. Americans were told that this bill would also reduce the deficit and restore the middle class. Instead, the bill will allow for millions in tax cuts to the very wealthy and increase by $2.3 trillion the national debt. Americans were told that the Medicaid program was safe and cuts are occurring. Instead, we see provisions that would cause nearly 14 million Americans to lose their health care, and millions more will have to pay higher premiums and co-pays. Adding ineffective work requirements and lowering the federal matching rate for Medicaid in states are just some of the provisions that will result in millions of Americans losing their health coverage. Again, this is a debate about life and death. The loss of coverage would have a rippling effect on health care. Federally qualified health centers and safety net hospitals rely heavily on Medicaid reimbursement to provide high-quality care. In my home district, New York's 13th district, 72 federally funded health centers rely on federal investment to serve close to 1 million patients. Clinics like the Borinquen Health Center in Harlem, the Morris Heights Medical Center in the Bronx, and the Ryan Health Center in Washington Heights in Manhattan are essential to the medical ecosystem of that district. These clinics are much more than just health centers. They provide primary care. They provide preventive health care to kids with asthma, adults with diabetes. They host food pantries. The ranking member was in my district to see one of those at a school because they understand that food is medicine. Because this is a debate ultimately about life and death. This is not a comfortable debate. This is not an easy one. This is not one that we can laugh about. This is about life or death. Without a strong Medicaid program, these health facilities will be forced to limit their services that they offer. They lay off staff and they will even have to close. That is why I've introduced Amendment 309, which will require the Health and Human Services Secretary to conduct a study and report to Congress the effects of Medicaid cuts and the reduction in services of federally qualified health centers like the ones I described, community health centers, and safety net hospitals. These safety net hospitals are the last resort for working families that are sick, that cannot provide or have the money to pay for a Cadillac health plan, a private health plan that is so expensive. That's why I have 488,000 patients. Cuts to Medicaid will increase the uninsured rates and will dismantle healthcare. We must protect safety net programs. I urge the adoption of this amendment. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Amo, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to the members of the Rules Committee who have been here from darkness to light, and hopefully not to darkness again. But I've got to be clear that the moral darkness of this plan remains. There is a clear contrast in values here. And budgets are, as we know, are a statement of values, and my Republican colleagues have been showing through their force the stature of their values, and I don't find them to be high in this moment. As Americans slept and as they awoke, they are experiencing a reality where there's a strategy, an attempt, a plan to take away health care from more than 3.7 million Americans, school meals for 18.3 million children, food assistance for about 11 million hungry people, and access to higher education for 4 million aspirants. In my home state of Rhode Island alone, 28,000 people would lose health coverage by 2034. Over 12,000 students would lose some or all of their Pell Grant funding, and 21,000 Rhode Islanders would lose some or all of their food assistance. These are people's lives. This is their health. This is their future. And I'll say it again, that budgets are a statement of values, and this tells tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Rhode Islanders that they don't matter, and that is not true. These cuts are made all the more egregious by the fact that they are being used to finance a tax scheme that gives out handouts to the richest Americans. As written, this disastrous reconciliation bill would give the richest Americans an extra $82,000 just to begin, going up for more and more and more, yachts and fancy cars and trips to exotic places, while people on the other end suffer. It, meanwhile, would also hike the lowest earning Americans' tax rate by 19%. It's a moral inversion, a reverse Robin Hood scheme to steal from the poor and give to the rich. We saw the numbers from CBO, seeing household resources for the bottom 10% go down by 4%. For the top 10%, go up by 2%. And those might seem like small numbers, but the scale of the increase for the top is just immoral. And that's why I introduced Amendment 355, which would raise the top tax rate back to 39.6%. And conveniently, this is something that President Trump said himself, right? Broken clock is right twice a day. And I think we know that we have a revenue problem. We know that this is something we will have to deal with. And we know the wealthy not only can, but they should pay more. We just have to have courage. And I encourage support for this amendment from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And this amendment, of course, won't solve everything. We know that this Republican bill still strips health care from over 13 million Americans and puts 1 in 4 SNAP recipients at risk of losing benefits. It remains a betrayal. Raise the rate, it still doesn't solve for that. But it makes it slightly less fiscally irresponsible. Moody's cited our revenue challenges, specifically in their downgrade. Now, on to another amendment, because the devil's really in the details here. And beauty is truly in the eye of the beholder when it comes to this legislation, and I had to pay real close attention to this one to see how ugly this portion is. It's why I'm proud to co-lead Congressman Mike Thompson's Amendment 374, which would repeal the provision that eliminates the $200 tax on silencers. Silencers make mass shootings worse. more deadly. They make it harder for victims and law enforcement to locate the source of the shooting. What is beautiful about that? Making them cheaper. Not only does this provision make silencers more accessible, it would cost $1.4 billion. Here we are stealing, seeing a theft from Republicans of healthcare so that we can eliminate silencers? It's illogical, and I can think of better uses for $1.4 billion. Let's focus on caring for the sick and feeding the hungry and not making silencers cheaper. It's not fiscally responsible that you would do all of this while adding trillions to the national debt. And because of policies like these, we will face challenges. So with that, I encourage support for these two amendments, and let's get our house in order and focus on the people who need our support. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm here to ask for support to my amendment to this big bad billionaire bill, or whatever it's called. It's not about the nearly 100,000 Nevadans who will be left without health care. It's not about the thousands of homebound seniors who will no longer receive Meals on Wheels. It's not about the trillions that will be added to our national deficit. It's about water, something so precious and important to my home district of Southern Nevada. My amendment aims to stop Congressman Mark Amodei and the House Republicans from moving forward with the Trojan horse Utah land grab that jeopardizes Nevada's water security and could very well derail sensitive and complicated negotiations about the future of the Colorado River. I'm here because 2 weeks ago, literally in the middle of the night, seems to be a recurring theme for how Republicans legislate, Rep. Amodei advanced legislation in the Natural Resources Committee to sell off hundreds of thousands of acres of federal land in Nevada and Utah. The proceeds from those sales would go to Washington to pay for billionaire tax breaks in the budget bill. Mr. Amodei claims that this sell-off is necessary to lower the cost of housing. I've always supported releasing more federal land for housing in Nevada. In fact, I've introduced to do exactly that. But my first problem is that this proposal really isn't about housing. The Amodei proposal doesn't require that land sold in Nevada be used for housing. In fact, there is very little information on how exactly this land would be used, which leads me to my second issue with the proposal. For decades, the law has ensured that proceeds from federal land sales in Southern Nevada, which, as Congresswoman Titus has said, have been negotiated and supported by local government, but that those proceeds stay in Nevada. This proposal from Amodei would instead send these proceeds to the federal government, and Nevada would lose billions of dollars. This would mean less money to build more schools, water infrastructure, parks, and so much more. In fact, federal land sales in Southern Nevada have generated about $500 million to date to invest directly in Southern Nevada water priorities. Under Rep. Amodei's own projection, this move could divert nearly $8 billion over 10 years from Nevada. Think about it. Who would then pay for things like water and parks and schools? Nevada homeowners. So Amodei's move actually increases housing costs for Nevadans, not decreases them. And let me remind you that Rep. Amodei does not represent any part of Clark County, and his proposal is not supported by the county government or any member of Nevada's federal delegation elected by voters of Clark County. I would never introduce a bill to sell off land in another congressperson's district without consulting with them. Congresswoman Titus just proposed an amendment which I support, but I finally want to talk about the third issue with this proposal and the purpose of my amendment, which relates to Nevada and the Southwest's water security. Arizona Congressman Gay Scanlon and I have been alerted by water officials in Nevada and Arizona that the public land that Amodei wants to sell off in Utah could be used for a controversial water pipeline. The parcels of land marked for sale in this proposal, coincidentally, line up with the land in Utah that has been targeted for the so-called Lake Powell pipeline. This proposed pipeline has greatly concerned water managers in Nevada, Arizona, California, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. These are 6 of the 7 states that depend on the Colorado River, every one except Utah. If this land is sold and the pipeline is built, this could divert 28 billion gallons of water each year from Lake Powell and the Colorado River to communities in southern Utah, away from Nevada, Arizona, and other basin states. Look, Amadei did not consult local authorities in southern Nevada, and it shows, because he clearly doesn't understand the relationship between water and development and housing costs. I support the Titus Amendment. I'm asking you to advance my amendment to repeal the Amadei land sale in Utah so we can stop this Trojan horse to steal Nevada's water. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Langworthy, you have any questions? No. Mr. McGovern?
Ms. Sewell, I don't know, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Yeah.
Yes, you know, I was starting to talk about the effects of this horrible bill on public schools and the fact that the school vouchers are now being federalized. I mean, there are lots of states, including my own state, that gives tax credit to parents who put their money in a, foundation. They call it a foundation. There are no requirements as to who's eligible. So what happens is that lots of parents who already have their kids in private school now will have an opportunity, one-for-one, to get those, to get that a tax credit for that. And in my state of Alabama, a lot of those private schools popped up as a way of avoiding all deliberate speed in Brown versus Board of Education and created these segregated academies. And so I don't want this bill to give further credence to these vouchers being about choice when there are very little choices when you have small communities that are made up of 5,000 people and there's one public school and there's only one academy, and that academy is still all white in 2025. And, as a public school kid and parents who grew up, parents who were public school teachers, and my mom was a librarian and my dad was a high school basketball coach, I can tell you that in Selma, when I was growing up, the best school was Selma High School. It was Selma High School that sent kids off full scholarships to Duke and to other places. It wasn't the private academy that was private but didn't have a full array of sports or debate team or any of that. And I don't want to, as a member of Congress, promote these vouchers, which are, and this bill gives $5 billion, set aside of $5 billion for these private school vouchers. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. And I know that these private schools don't have to take the disabled or special ed kids. They have very different standards.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And to everybody on the